I'm Kate Ward, and this is your Dickman Farms Smart Gardening Tip. And today I wanted to chat with you a little bit about trimming. We've had a lot of questions and calls about trimming, what, who, when. So let's start with the when, not now. And the reason I say that is currently we're midway through October. So September, beginning of September, middle of September, go ahead. But middle of October, if we haven't gotten a hard frost, then you do not want to trim. Because every time you trim, it stimulates growth. And if we haven't gotten a good frost that says, go to sleep, little plants, then we can actually stimulate growth. When we stimulate growth this late in the season, we're going to get a frost any day. And so when we get that frost, if we've had new growth, it's going to hit that new growth. It hasn't had time to toughen up or harden off, as it's called, and it will kill it. So we don't want to accidentally kill next year's buds. So, secondarily, after that hard frost, what you can do is there's certain plants you do want to trim and certain plants you don't. So, for my do want to trim, is things like this Rosa Sharon. These are the leftover seed pods of this plant, and it flowered quite a bit. But you could go ahead and shape this. You see that there's a couple long branches here, and they're drooping down a little bit more than I'd like. So I'd like to get it nice and rounded. So you can just go ahead and lightly trim off the tops here so that you get a more rounded form to begin growing next year. You can see here where I did half of it. It is now this nice rounded canopy to start growth for next year. Now what you wouldn't want to trim is something like this lilac. So if it blooms in the fall, go ahead and trim it. But if it blooms in the spring, like the lilac, don't trim. If you did, you'd cut off these nice big fat buds. These nice big fat buds have flowers in them. So generally you want to trim this in the spring after it's done flowering. The other thing that people get into trouble with are things like rhododendrons. Rhododendrons are evergreen. They're the same thing. They bloom in the spring. So if we bloom in the spring here and we were to trim this off right now to even it up, because you can see there's a couple long pieces here, you can go ahead and do it. Just recall that you'll be sacrificing flowers for next spring. So it's up to you, but I'd wait if I were you. The other thing to look at is something like these evergreens. Evergreens are great because they're just that. They're evergreen. But as you can see by this, there's a couple tall wingdingers there, and I might want to shape that up so that the growth when it starts in the spring is nice and even. So if I'm going to do that, go ahead, snip it, but maybe consider doing this just before Christmas, because just before Christmas I can add this, bring it inside, add it to my evergreens or my displays for Christmas time. It looks timely and appropriate, so it's a nice thing to do. My final thing I'll show you today is the hydrangeas. People always ask about these. They're not sure who, what, where, and when. Give you a quick lesson. This is, if plants had first and last names like you and I did, this would be first name hydrangea, last name paniculata. The other type you usually see is hydrangea macrophylla. That's the one with the pink or the blue colored flowers. They're really kind of ball shaped. So those ones you kind of want to leave alone. But hydrangea paniculata, you can go ahead and trim this time of year with no worries about next year's flowers. And the biggest thing, these big old flowers, they're going to dry on. They're going to sit there all winter. So if you don't want to look at them as the wind beats them up, you can go ahead and trim them so that they'll even out. You can start your plant with a nice, even, round plant for next spring and be successful in still getting it to flower. So if you have any questions, please come on in. Wait for that hard frost before you get trimming. And until then, this has been your Dickman Farms Smart Gardening Tip.